Welcome to Coast Vue, where we celebrate every single day the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi such a great place to live, work, and play. It's Friday on Coast Vue. This is Jeff Duncan Day from NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. And Jeff, man, there's so much to talk about as it relates to the Saints. We knew it was going to be a dynamic season. But anyway, before we go any further, how you doing, my friend?
Doing great, Ricky. Coming on the heels of kind of an epic Final Four weekend. We had incredible weather, and the event was spectacular. Superdome, I thought, shined, kind of renovated Superdome. First real stress test of massive crowds for an event like this. And every report I got from the national people that were in town, the NCAA folks, were rave reviews. So it's kind of a good, positive vibe right now in the city.
Well, you and I talked about it. I mean, we knew having the Final Four in New Orleans was going to be good. It's good for coastal Mississippi. What's cool is again, we've talked about, but all the things that surround the Final Four, the people who come to town, the parties, the showcasing of the city. And I think that the Times-Picayune and NOLA.com did a really good job of sort of doing a debriefing. But, you know, most of the people who were involved say that the city gets an A+.
Yeah, and it was really important, I think, for people to see that in the industry, because the dome's been renovated. It's halfway through its $450 million renovation. So this was kind of the halfway point with a lot of new back-of-house type features, commissaries, new locker rooms, concourses. So a lot of things that maybe fans and media don't see, but industry people see when they put on these big events. And we've got the Super Bowl coming here in 2025, and the NFL people were here. All their special events people were here on site. So they were monitoring to see how this thing went off, and it went off. It didn't just go off without a hitch. I mean, it was spectacular how well it went off. The city thrived. The hotel and hospitality industry really stepped up. I think they had huge numbers. And so it was important for special events and this big event business that New Orleans is in, conventions, major sporting events. It was important for them to kind of put their best foot forward, and I think they did.
And the games were good, and the storyline to the games were good. Did it play out sort of the way you thought it was going to?
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny is I think if they played those three games again, you could have a completely different outcome, because I think the games were so close, the teams were so closely matched. But you're right, there was a lot of drama. And I thought the dome looked great on TV, on the broadcast. You know, the lighting was good. The court looked spectacular. I mean, it was packed, Ricky. And one of the cool things about it, you know, when I go to a Saints game, there's a ton of traffic, right? Because everyone's driving from our neighboring cities or communities, neighborhoods into the game. This event is purely an out-of-town tourist event. All the fans coming in, or industry people from college basketball, well, they're all staying in hotels downtown. They're all walking from their hotel rooms or taking maybe Ubers. So there's really no traffic. I was able to drive in, being one of the few people that would be driving. It was just remarkable to see how many people were on the sidewalks walking to the game and not driving. You could drive your car right up to the stadium without any problem at all. So it was just a different kind of event, and I'd forgotten that aspect of it.
That's really cool. That is really cool. Okay, Saints, buddy. Okay. Let's start with the blockbuster trade with Philadelphia. I've been reading this morning. There are 100 different points of view about whether this was good or bad for the Saints. But let's get it from you. What's your take on it all?
Well, I think it's impossible to say if it's good or bad right now. I mean, we have to wait and see how this thing plays out and what picks are used and where, and if there's more deals down the line. But I do think it's very intriguing that they made it early on. And I know there's been a lot of people questioning why you would do it now and not do it on draft day, but I think the Saints were probably trying to fire a preemptive strike to get ahead of maybe some other teams that might have had the same idea. Last year they got kind of caught at the end of the draft. They really couldn't move, and they were kind of caught holding the bag. They tried to trade up a number of times into the top 10 or 12 and didn't have the draft capital to do it, and were kind of against the 8-ball. And this year I think they said, we don't want to be in that position again. They probably knew the Eagles were in the market for trading those 2 picks, and they probably wanted to be the ones that did it and not someone else. So I don't think there's a plan yet. I could be wrong, but I don't think there's like a reason they did it to get 1 player or they're going to sit still and get 2. I think they wanted the flexibility to have those picks, and then once the draft gets going, they can make moves. I think that's more likely what's going on here than, say, they're targeting 1 single player.
Well, we talked a little bit about this last week, but not, all the work they had to do to get in, at least in the game, around Deshaun Watson, which I've, repeatedly say, I'm glad they didn't get him. But because they had to do all the maneuvering for salary cap, et cetera, to get ready for that, it really opened up some opportunities for them. So a lot of debate about whether they're going to bring a wide receiver in. So as you have said many times, that one of their goals is to try to fix all of their current needs through free agency. So when they get to the draft, they can really be smart about getting the best player available. You still think that's their strategy?
Well, it's always their strategy, and the reason is you never know what's going to happen in the draft. You really can't rely on – there's so many circumstances that are out of their control. For instance, say they wanted one of these quarterbacks, and that was the idea that a lot of people have positioned out there, that the Saints now are going to go get a quarterback. I could be wrong, but I don't think that is the thing, because you don't know when those quarterbacks are going to come off the board. Some teams in the top 5 might target them and take them, and the Saints would not be able to get up that high probably with those 2 draft picks. So I think this is all about flexibility and having a little bit of the control of the draft. If you want to take 2 players at those picks, you're going to get 2 really good players, starting caliber players. But if, say, one of these quarterbacks that you really, really like starts to fall and he gets down to like number 9 or number 8 or number 10, you have the ability to go up and get them. So I think this gives them, some flexibility in what happens on draft day. They didn't have that at all last year, and really, I think it was still in their mind when they made this trade.
So they've still been making some moves to fortify the defense. It's clear that they're really trying to fill holes and do whatever. But when you look at the draft class as it relates to wide receiver, there's a good chance the Saints are going to end up with a really good receiver, isn't there?
Well, yeah, if they choose to go in that direction, I think if they stay and don't trade up for a quarterback, I think they'll take a receiver with one of those 2 picks. I'd be surprised. There's a bunch of good ones on the board. I think the last time I looked, Ricky, there was 4 receivers ranked in the top 20 overall prospects. So you'd think one of them would be available with one of those 2 picks. And so I think there's probably a thought process of usually guys like Jeff Ireland, who's the head of college scouting, they have grades, for every tier of draft prospect. And often each draft, they don't have 32 players that are graded as first-round talents. Usually you have between like 16, 17, and about 25, somewhere in there. So this draft could be one where Jeff Ireland's board has 20 clearly graded first-round players. And that's now they've got 2 picks in those top 20. So it doesn't matter how it sorts out. They're going to be happy with getting 2 players in that top 20. That could be what the thought process was here. And then after those 20 players, the grade drops off to another lower graded player that you would probably be getting the same player at number 22 or number 23 as you would at number 40. That happens a lot. And so that could be the thought process here. And hey, we know we need a left tackle. We know we need a receiver. Let's secure that and go ahead and make this trade because we know we got 2 picks in the top 20.
Well, if you think about it, and you know the history on this really well, but it is very unusual for the Saints, and if you go back in history, to have 2 picks in the first round. This is a real opportunity to build something significant. They may do some trading up, as you pointed out, but it's not something that happens every year, or even, it's a rare event, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I tweeted about it the other day. I think it's happened 7 times in the history of the Saints. So that's a long history with only 7 times this has happened. And we still don't know that that's going to happen because they could always trade up with the 2 picks and use that draft collateral to get one really high pick, and that could be the option. I mean, they did that, if you remember, and it didn't work out well. It was when Jim Haslett was the coach. They had two, I think, picks in the top 12, and they used two of them to trade up and get Jonathan Sullivan, the defensive tackle from Georgia, and he was a bust. He was one of the biggest busts in Saints history. So sometimes, having the two picks, you got to use them wisely. The time I think most recently when they had it was 2017, and they got Marshawn Lattimore and Ryan Ramczyk late in the first round, and both those guys ended up being Pro Bowlers, so it worked out well there.
It's pretty interesting. Well, we had when we come back after break, we'll talk about the visit from Tyrann Mathieu from New Orleans. Based on what he's saying, he's certainly putting his best foot forward, but it doesn't look like the Saints will get him. But I'd be interested to hear Jeff's point of view about that. They continue to fill these gaps. They're really focused on safety. They've done some other stuff on the defensive line. We'll come back and sort of break all that down after the break with Jeff Duncan. See you after this moment. Welcome back to Coast Vue. We have my friend Jeff Duncan from NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. Always love visiting with him. And I told Kyle the other day, Jeff, and he said the same thing back to me after you got off last Friday. I said, I feel like, I've always been a Saints fan, but I feel like I'm a better Saints fan now because of the conversations that we're having. And he felt the same way, that we feel like we have a better understanding of what's going on behind the scenes. And it's fun to know that. What happens in the off season, people go off and do other things and they don't pay close enough attention. And so when the season starts to come around and you get to training camp, then they haven't learned all these players, but we're learning all those players now. And it's going to be interesting. It's going to be so much fun going into the NFL draft, knowing a little bit more about the strategy that's being deployed. So thank you so much for joining us every week. So,
Ricky, that it helps to have an organization that has had the stability that the Saints have. I do think that's helped in a lot of ways because we're dealing with the same officials all the time. Mickey Loomis, he's here so long, he establishes a track record and a pattern of behavior along with Jeff Ireland. And, of course, Sean was here for so long, the offensive staff. You get to know them and you spend a lot of time with those officials, and it helps you understand the thought process. Whereas if you're in an organization that's changing coaches every 2 or 3 years, you got different philosophies and different mindsets, and we've been fortunate here, I think, to have the same group for a long time. So it's much easier to get a better understanding, more in-depth understanding.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to see that you feel that continuity even in this season with a new head coach. You don't get the impression, and people are writing about this actually, and this. You don't get the impression that they have any notion that this is rebuilding anything. This is a continuation. They may tweak and move some things around. Dennis is going to bring his personality to it, but they think they can win, and they're making moves just like they would have made when Sean Payton was here. You feel that continuity, don't you?
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point, and it makes sense to me because this roster is pretty mature. When you look at it, I mean, there's a lot of veteran players that are key players on this team, from Cam Jordan to Demario Davis to Mike Thomas, Alvin Kamara, Ryan Ramczyk. I mean, they're all guys that have been with the program for multiple years. So it makes sense to try and win now and go all in. I think that trade had a lot to do with that mindset as opposed to rebuilding long-term and trying to build through the draft. I think the Saints feel like, hey, we can win now. We just got to fill a couple of key needs in this team, and let's ensure that we have a chance to do that.
So what you're seeing, they're continuing to bring players in. You can detail what some of the most recent moves that have been made, but it's going to create a little bit of competition during training camp. It'll be an interesting training camp for that reason, won't it?
Yeah. Well, look, right now they're all out at the Metairie training facility. The off-season strength and conditioning program began this week. They have a new strength and conditioning coach, director of sports science. His name's Matt Ray. He came from the University of Alabama. They got him away from Nick Saban. It was a big addition. And some of the players we talked with today actually talked about some of the new programs and some of the new techniques and tactics that they're implementing out there. It's much more advanced, much more kind of state-of-the-art philosophies. And I think the thought process is maybe it'll prevent injuries on the front end by doing it this way. So I think that's an interesting storyline this offseason. And then, you mentioned during the break, Tyrann Mathieu coming in. That's gotten all the headlines, right? New Orleanian, LSU star. But I really think this was a lot to do about nothing. I'm not saying they won't sign Tyrann Mathieu, but it felt to me like a publicity stunt, if that made any sense. The fact is, he was already in town. He came out and visited. I don't know if they even talked contract terms. Everything I've heard, he's asking for a very high number, and that was before the Saints even came in for the visit. It just seemed like something that sometimes these things happen, Ricky, where the front office has a good relationship with the agent of that player, and they're helping him out. They get publicity out of it. It lets you know that another team's interested in him, and it's kind of one of these unwritten things that people don't know about. That, hey, we'll help you out with your guy. Don't forget about it down the road. Scratch our back down the road. That's what this felt like. It could eventually lead to something, but the fact that they didn't talk contract terms and the way it was couched publicly was just a get-to-know each other session. Well, I'm not sure how much they need to get to know each other. Tyrann Mathieu lives here in the offseason. So to me, that felt, the fact that he left there without a contract told me a lot.
Well, he said, I don't think the Saints need me. And the other thing he said is that all I'm focused on now is the security of my family. So that's the same thing as saying I'm too expensive for the Saints and I really want a lot of money.
and look, they'd already signed Marcus May, away from the Jets. They brought in Sorensen from the Kansas City Chiefs. They've signed safeties. They brought P.J. Williams back. They have C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who can also play safety. That's really not a high priority for this team right now. Now, if his market comes down, and I think it will the further we get along in this offseason, maybe it becomes a fit. But I don't think at this point that's what Tyrann Mathieu's looking for, and I certainly don't think the Saints are in the market to spend a lot of money at the safety position.
Have you spent any time, and do you have any sort of objective analysis on how does he stack up with the players that we already have on the team? Would he be raising the bar that much more to put yourself in a salary cap situation by getting them?
I think the best way to compare Tyrann Mathieu would be somebody very recent that is fresh in the mind of Saints fans, Malcolm Jenkins. I think he would be a little bit more of a dynamic playmaker than Malcolm Jenkins, but he also would make a few more mistakes than Malcolm Jenkins made. But a very similar style of player. In other words, he's not going to come in and dominate every game. I mean, Malcolm Jenkins wasn't dominating, but he's a good, solid player and a veteran guy that knows a lot about NFL offenses. But at this stage of his career, there's a reason he's moved on a few times. I mean, teams don't see him as an elite player at this stage of his career.
So we've made a few more moves. We made a move at defensive line. We're gonna have a hell of a defensive line, aren't we?
Yeah, they believe in that stacking depth there, and clearly that's a top priority. I mean, they are extremely deep. They may have the deepest defensive line in the league. I don't think there's any doubt about it. There's a lot of good players there, and that's always been a priority for the Saints. I don't think they're done either. I wouldn't be surprised if they added a defensive tackle in this upcoming draft. Get a young player at that position. But that's clearly the strength of this team right now. There's no doubt about it.
We haven't talked about Alvin Kamara in a while. You mentioned a few minutes ago he's really important. He's probably going to miss some games this year, isn't he?
Yeah, I don't see how he won't, considering the severity of that offseason incident. Really been no progress on that from a legal standpoint. That thing could drag on for a while. But I know the Saints will go into this draft probably looking to add to that running back room. It wouldn't shock me to see them use one of their mid-round picks on a running back. That position, Ricky, has been really devalued in recent years. You can get a really good running back in the 4th round or the 5th round of the draft. And that's somebody the Saints could plug in there, use him in their system. If they decide to hang on with Mark Ingram, that would give them solid depth at that spot. So I don't think it's as big of a loss as people think. Alvin Kamara is a great player, but when you have time to prepare for it, a loss like that, it gives you a full offseason to kind of have a plan in place to replace him if it's 4 games, 6 games, 8 games, whatever it's going to be.
It seems like, and maybe other teams are dealing with this, and I don't know about because I'm not paying attention to it, but it seems like every year we go into a year with a key player that we're going to have to do without for several games. Is that unusual, or does that just happen all over the league?
It's not unusual at all. I tell people all the time. I mean, sometimes I think, one of my biggest jobs at what I do is trying to give perspective, right? Trying to provide the landscape of the NFL and letting people see that this is part of the league. I mean, Sean Payton was great at that. He always talked about this is the way it is. I mean, people would always lament the injuries. And then I would try and point out, this is the way it is around the league. Everybody's dealing with it. Now, the Saints last year probably had an extraordinarily high number, but they also, the year before, had a very low number. So these things kind of even out, and I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, the Saints have kind of avoided some of these off-season suspensions and things like that. There was a period of time where they didn't have any, and I think it's all just kind of catching up with them now, the law of probabilities playing out.
You and I, okay, you just said it. There's been nothing new as it relates to the legal side of the Kamara case. But, you've also said, and we all know this, that it was so out of character for Alvin Kamara. He's such a smart guy. He doesn't put himself in that kind of a situation. Is there any theory working around that he's gotten the wrong people around him and that he's had to change his behavior or what? Any buzz about that at all?
No, but I can tell you this. I mean, talking to NFL and Saints officials kind of privately off the record, they're not concerned about it at all of being some kind of disturbing trend or something they need to worry about. They think it was just an isolated, very, uncharacteristic incident. They've talked with Malvin about it, and I think they're ready just to try and put it in the past and move forward. They don't think this is going to be something that is a recurring problem with Alvin Kamara.
Yeah, I've enjoyed getting to know him through reading more deeply about. He's well-read, he's smart, he's very philosophical, and it is out of character based on what I know about it. That is for sure. Hey, we're out of time. We'll talk more about the Pelicans next week. Have a great weekend, my friend, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, I look forward to talking to you again next week, Ricky. Take care.